Alien was not just a science fiction movie about a bug on a spaceship, it was a psychological endurance test that nearly broke its cast, poisoned its crew, and traumatized a studio. We see the Xenomorph as the perfect organism, but the production that birthed it was a mess of imperfect, volatile human collisions. We are talking about actors passing out from toxic fumes, secret plots to replace the lead stars, visceral on-set betrayals, and practical effects so grotesque they were stopped by customs officials for being pornographic. What you saw in theaters was a polished nightmare. What happened behind the lens was a waking one. In this video, we are not just looking at trivia. We are dissecting the disasters. I have pulled the call sheets, the rejected drafts, and the buried interviews to bring you the truth about the Nostromo. Here are 20 weird, disturbing, and absolutely true facts about Alien. And stay tuned, because the bonus fact at the end reveals the grim fate Ridley Scott originally planned for Ellen Ripley, a finale so dark, the studio threatened to fire him on the spot. Number 20. The set was literally poisonous. We are starting with the most dangerous secret of the production. You know that eerie, heavy atmosphere inside the alien derelict ship in the egg chamber? That blue laser light cutting through the smoke? It looks incredible. It also nearly killed the crew. To achieve those solid beams of light, the production team could not just use a smoke machine. They needed density. They used a combination of burning chemicals and aerosols that created a heavy, choking fog. But it was not just fog. The laser effect required a specific type of lighting setup borrowed from the Who's rock concerts, which generated immense heat and reacted with the chemical smoke. The air inside the soundstage became toxic. It was not just uncomfortable, it was hazardous. The mixture of hydrocarbons in the air meant that after a few hours of shooting, crew members were coughing up black phlegm. The actors, encased in those heavy spacesuits, were breathing this cocktail in recycled hot air. There are reports that during the filming of the egg chamber sequence, the air quality dropped so low that people were fainting. Ridley Scott, obsessed with the visual texture, kept pushing for more smoke, more density, oblivious or perhaps indifferent to the fact that he was essentially gassing his payroll. The breathless panic you see as Kane descends into the egg chamber, that is not just acting. That is a biological reaction to a suffocating environment. Number 19. The Chestburster scene was an ambush. This is the moment that changed cinema, but it was built on a betrayal. The script simply said, the thing emerges. The cast knew something was going to happen to John Hurt. They saw the puppets. They knew the mechanics, but they did not know the violence. Ridley Scott deliberately misled his cast. He wanted genuine terror, not a performance of terror. On the morning of the shoot, the special effects team, led by Nick Alder, rigged John Hurt with explosive squibs packed with real animal blood and guts obtained from a local butcher shop that morning. The smell was already pungent. Raw meat under hot studio lights begins to turn quickly. When they rolled cameras, the cast expected a small pop and a puppet. What they got was a pressurized explosion of visceral gore. It was not a splash, it was a hose. A jet of blood hit Veronica Cartwright directly in the face. Her scream of shock, that high-pitched, vibrating gasp where she trips backward, is 100% real. She did not know she was going to be sprayed with offal. Yaphet Kotto went home in a state of shock, refusing to speak to anyone for hours. The set smelled like an abattoir. Scott had turned a movie set into a slaughterhouse to get the reaction he wanted. He shattered the trust of his actors, but he got the shot. Number 18. Giger's art was held by customs as pornography. The Xenomorph design is legendary, but getting it into the country was a legal nightmare. H.R. Giger, the Swiss surrealist commissioned to design the creature, did not paint spaceships. He painted biomechanical nightmares that fused machinery with overt sexual organs. When Giger shipped his initial concept paintings and prototypes to the production team in England, they were intercepted by airport customs. The agents opened the crates, took one look at the disturbing imagery, which included phallic heads and yonic openings dripping with slime, and immediately impounded everything. They flagged the materials as obscene pornography. The production manager had to go to the airport and argue that this was not smut for a private collection. It was the monster for a 20th Century Fox movie. Even then, the studio executives were horrified. They looked at the facehugger designs and the derelict ship's entrances and panicked, realizing the entire movie was essentially a rape metaphor in space. They tried to sanitize Giger's work, but Ridley Scott fought them. He knew that for the alien to be scary, it had to be erotic, invasive, and deeply uncomfortable. Number 17. The suit actor nearly died of heat stroke. Inside the suit, things were even worse than on the set. The Xenomorph was not a puppet. It was a 6-foot, 10-inch Nigerian graphic design student named Bolaji Badejo. Badejo was chosen for his impossibly thin frame and long limbs, which made him look non-human, but The suit was a torture chamber. Constructed from latex, car parts, and ribbing, the suit had zero ventilation. Once Badejo was sealed inside, he was effectively wrapped in industrial rubber under 1,000-watt studio lights. He could only wear the head for 15-minute intervals. During one intense sequence, the heat inside the suit spiked so drastically that Badejo collapsed. He did not just stumble, he passed out from oxygen deprivation and heat exhaustion. The crew had to frantically tear the head off the costume to get him air. It was not just a one-time incident. Badejo spent months standing on a special swing frame between takes because the suit's tail meant he could not sit down. He was physically deteriorating as the shoot went on, sweating pounds of water weight daily, sacrificing his health to become a monster. Number 16. Veronica Cartwright was tricked out of the lead role. Imagine showing up to work thinking you are the hero, only to find out you are the victim. That is what happened to Veronica Cartwright. Cartwright, a seasoned actress known for Invasion of the Body Snatchers, was originally called in to read for the role of Ripley. She auditioned for Ripley. She met with the producers about Ripley. In her mind, she was Ripley. Then, she got the call sheet. She arrived in London for a costume fitting and asked the wardrobe department for the Ripley outfit. The wardrobe mistress looked at her, confused, and said, "No, dear, you are Lambert." Cartwright was devastated. The studio and Scott had decided to pivot last minute, casting the unknown Sigourney Weaver as the lead and demoting Cartwright to the role of the hysterical navigator. Cartwright did not hide her resentment. It created a genuine friction on set. Her character, Lambert, is constantly on edge, constantly combating Ripley's authority. That was not just acting. That was Veronica Cartwright channeling her real-life frustration at Sigourney Weaver, the rookie who stole her movie. Number 15. The space jockey props were burning the budget. The derelict ship scene features the space jockey, that massive, fossilized pilot fused to his chair. It is one of the most impressive practical sets ever built. But the studio hated it. Fox executives looked at the budget for this one scene and screamed. They wanted to cut it entirely. They argued, why spend $500,000 on a set that is only on screen for 2 minutes? To them, it was a waste of money. Ridley Scott argued that it was essential to establish the scale of the horror, that something huge and powerful had been killed by this cargo. But here is the trick Scott used to make it look even bigger without spending more money. The space jockey prop was large, but not large enough to make the humans look like insects. So, for the wide shots, Scott fired the actors. He sent Sigourney Weaver and Tom Skerritt to their trailers and brought in his own children and the children of the cinematographer. He put the kids in scaled-down spacesuits. Because the children were half the size of the adults, the space jockey prop suddenly looked twice as big. It was not a special effect. It was forced perspective using child labor. Number 14. Jerry Goldsmith hated the movie. The score for Alien is iconic, avant-garde, eerie, and romantic in a twisted way. But the composer, the legendary Jerry Goldsmith, absolutely loathed what Ridley Scott did to his music. Goldsmith wrote a lush, grand, romantic score for the opening credits, trying to capture the majesty of space. Scott listened to it and said no. He wanted something cold and unsettling. Scott scrapped Goldsmith's opening theme and replaced it with a different track Goldsmith had written 5 minutes later. But it got worse. For large chunks of the movie, Scott removed Goldsmith's score entirely and replaced it with temp tracks from totally different movies, including Goldsmith's own score for the movie Freud. He also used classical music pieces without telling Goldsmith. Goldsmith was furious. He felt his work had been butchered and rearranged by a director who did not understand music structure. The tension between the visual and the audio that disjointed, uncomfortable feeling partially comes from the fact that the music was not always meant to be there. Number 13. Yaphet Kotto picked fights to fuel the tension. Yaphet Kotto, who played Parker, was a method actor who believed that if the crew were supposed to be annoyed with each other, the actors should be too. He went out of his way to antagonize Sigourney Weaver. Kotto refused to break character between takes when dealing with Weaver. He would ignore her, talk over her, or mutter comments under his breath. He wanted Parker's resentment of Ripley's rank to feel authentic. It worked, but it made the set a hostile work environment. There is a scene where Parker snaps at Ripley to get off my back. The venom in that delivery is real. Kotto was a powerhouse, physically imposing and loud, and he used that to intimidate the relatively inexperienced Weaver, forcing her to stand her ground for real. The gender politics on screen mirrored the power struggle happening when the camera stopped rolling. Number 12. The Ash head was a macabre contraption. When Ash is revealed to be an android, his head is knocked off, and he has to be reactivated on a table to speak. This was not a simple animatronic. To get the performance right, they cut a hole in the table. Actor Ian Holm knelt under the table and stuck his real head through the hole. Then, the special effects team built a latex dummy neck around his chin and filled it with a mixture of milk, pasta, and glass marbles to look like android innards. Holm had to sit there for hours, covered in souring milk and pasta, with his head trapped in a table, acting his heart out while tubes pumped white blood into his mouth. The discomfort you see in his eyes, the frantic twitching movement, is partially the result of a classically trained Shakespearean actor realizing he is drowning in dairy products for a science fiction movie. Number 11. The facehugger was filled with oysters. We've talked about the chestburster, but the facehugger autopsy scene was just as gross. When Ash dissects the creature, Scott wanted the insides to look organic, wet, and disgusting. He did not want rubber. He used fresh seafood. The interior of the facehugger was packed with fresh oysters, clams, and sheep's intestine. The problem? The hot studio lights. After hours of shooting under the intense heat, the seafood began to cook inside the latex skin. The smell was described as unholy. Actors had to lean in close to this rotting seafood cocktail and act intrigued. When Ash probes the creature and it quivers, that was not just mechanics. It was the texture of real, slimy, organic matter shifting around. The look of revulsion on the cast's faces required very little acting. Number 10. The alien's drool was shredded condoms and KY jelly. The alien does not have eyes. It has teeth and it has drool. A lot of drool. Ridley Scott wanted the creature to feel constantly wet, a distinct contrast to the dry, sterile technology of the ship. To create the viscous, dripping saliva that oozes from the alien's jaws, the prop team bought gallons of KY jelly. It was the only substance that had the right shimmer and stringiness under the lights. But to make it hang in those long, thick strands, they needed a binding agent. They found that shredded latex condoms mixed into the jelly gave it the tensile strength to hang without dripping too fast. So every time you see the alien hiss, it is essentially spitting sexual lubricant and rubber at the protagonist. It is gross, it is sexual, and it is exactly the kind of subliminal horror Giger intended. Number 9. The maggots in the skull failed. Ridley Scott is a perfectionist, sometimes to a fault. For the design of the alien's translucent head dome, he had a brilliant idea. He wanted the creature to have a brain that was visibly moving and pulsing under the skin. His solution? Fill the skull cap with thousands of live maggots. The plan was to pack the maggots into the head prop so that their writhing would create a shifting organic pattern under the translucent dome. They actually tried this. But under the hot studio lights, the maggots did not just writhe. They went dormant and died. They stopped moving entirely, leaving the alien looking like it had a head full of static mush. Scott had to scrap the idea and go with wire mesh and polished bone, which ultimately looked much more elegant. Number 8. The Star Beast script. Before it was Alien, the movie had a much pulpier, B-movie title, Star Beast. The original screenplay by Dan O'Bannon was a low-budget horror flick. It did not have the corporate satire, the android subplot, or the brooding atmosphere. It was basically Gremlins in space. When producers Walter Hill and David Giller got hold of the script, they hated it. They thought the dialogue was trash. They rewrote the entire thing, adding the character of Ash the android, which O'Bannon hated. O'Bannon was actually kicked off the set at one point because he was so vocal about how they were ruining his movie. It was not until Ridley Scott came on board and visualized the script that it transformed from a schlocky creature feature into high art. Number 7. Jonesy the cat was manipulated. Jonesy, the ship's cat, is the ultimate survivor. But getting a cat to act terrified of an alien that clearly looks like a rubber suit is difficult. Cats do not care about monsters. In the scene where the alien descends behind Jonesy and the cat hisses violently, the animal trainers could not get the cat to react. The cat just sat there, looking bored. To get the shot, the crew hid a German Shepherd behind a screen. At the exact moment they needed the reaction, they dropped the screen. The cat, seeing a sudden predator, arched its back and hissed in genuine aggression. They immediately covered the dog back up. It was mean, but it sold the idea that the cat sensed the pure evil of the Xenomorph. Number 6. The Nostromo was built from junk. The set designers for Alien were pioneers of used universe science fiction. They did not want the ship to look like Star Trek. They wanted it to look like an oil rig or a submarine. To achieve this intricate industrial look on a budget, they went to an aircraft graveyard. The corridors of the Nostromo are lined with scrap parts from old Canberra bombers and 14 fighter jets. The seats on the bridge? They are ejected seats from military aircraft. By using real aeronautical scrap, they gave the set a tactical reality. The switches clicked for real. The metal had real scratches and dents. It was not plywood painted silver. It was the guts of war machines repurposed for deep space. Number 5. The handheld camera revolution. In 1979, Science fiction was usually shot on steady, locked-down tripods to accommodate special effects. Ridley Scott threw that rule out the airlock. For the finale, where Ripley is running through the exploding ship, Scott picked up the camera himself. He operated a handheld camera, running alongside Sigourney Weaver. This was unheard of for a visual effects movie. The shaking, the blurred lights, the feeling of chaotic movement that comes from the director physically sprinting through the set. He wanted the audience to feel the vibration of the ship's engines. He banged the camera into walls, tilted it wildly, and broke the cinematic language of the time to create a documentary-style panic. Number 4. The characters had no gender. When O'Bannon and Shusett wrote the original script, they included a note at the very beginning that changed Hollywood forever. The crew is unisex, and all parts are interchangeable for men or women. There was no Ellen Ripley specifically, it was just Ripley. The role could have been played by a man. In fact, most studios assumed it would be played by a man. It was only later in the casting process that Ridley Scott and the producers decided to cast a woman as the sole survivor. This was not a political statement at the time. They just thought it would be more shocking if the final girl was not the damsel, but the competent warrant officer. It was an accidental revolution. Number 3. The opening title sequence. The opening of Alien is a masterclass in tension. The title creates itself line by line, but this was not done with computers. It was 1979. The title sequence was created by filming physical cutouts. They had the letters of ALIEN cut out and a light shone behind them. The camera moved slowly while pieces of the letters were physically revealed. It was a tedious, frame-by-frame analog process. The eerie, disjointed music combined with the slow reveal of the word suggested that the movie itself was hatching. Number 2. The mother computer text. Trivia hunters look closely at the screens. When Ripley is typing into the mother computer interface to find out about Order 937, the text on the screen is incredibly detailed. But if you pause it and zoom in, you realize it is gobbledygook. It is not futuristic code. It is largely gibberish, mixed with extracts from Joseph Conrad's novel Nostromo. That's right. The name of the ship, Nostromo, comes from a Joseph Conrad book. The shuttle, Narcissus, is another Conrad title. The computer text contains passages from the book describing the political unrest in a fictional South American country. The production designers were sneaking in literary Easter eggs while the characters were fighting for their lives. Number 1. The corporation's name. We know them as the villainous Weyland-Yutani Corporation, the emblem of corporate greed. But in the first movie, the name Weyland-Yutani is never actually spoken aloud. It appears on computer screens and on beer cans, but the characters just call it the company. The name itself has a weird origin. Ron Cobb, the concept artist, created the name to sound like a merger between a British Leyland and a Japanese tech giant like Toyota. He came up with Weyland-Yutani no D initially because he wanted to suggest a future where the British and Japanese economies had bought out the American space program. It was a geopolitical prediction baked into a logo, suggesting a future where nations do not matter, only shareholders do. Bonus fact: the original ending killed Ripley. The ending of Alien is triumphant. Ripley blows the alien out of the airlock, records her log, and goes into hypersleep. It is the perfect setup for a franchise. But that was not the ending Ridley Scott filmed in his head. In Scott's original pitch for the finale, Ripley does not survive. The plan was for the alien to corner Ripley in the shuttle. She shoots it with the harpoon, but it makes no difference. The alien then slams its hand through her helmet, decapitating her instantly. But it gets weirder. Scott wanted the alien to then sit in the pilot's chair and begin pressing buttons. The final shot of the movie would have been the alien mimicking Ripley's voice, speaking into the radio to send a log entry to Earth, luring more humans to their doom. When Scott pitched this to the studio executives at Fox, they went pale. They did not just say no. The executive in charge threatened to fire Scott on the spot if he killed the hero. They knew audiences would revolt if the monster won. Scott was forced to let Ripley live, inadvertently saving the character who would go on to become the greatest science fiction heroine of all time. Alien was not just a movie, it was a collision of toxic chemistry, studio interference, and dangerous ambition. It survived poison gas, rotting meat, and rejected scripts to become the perfect organism of horror cinema. The reality of the production proves that sometimes, to make a nightmare that lasts forever, you have to live through one first. Would you like me to find some concept art by H.R. Geiger for the alien derelict ship or the space jockey?